Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kachijian, and today I'm joined by Josh Bonhotal. Josh is Vice President of Performance for Future, a digital fitness and training startup that aims to revolutionize health and wellness around the world. Prior to his role with Future, Josh held positions as Assistant Strength and Conditioning Coach with the Chicago Bulls and as Associate Director of Strength and Conditioning with Purdue University. Through his experiences in high-level sport and technology startups, Josh has some unique insights into how to identify and develop talent, build teams that adhere to a long-lasting strategic vision, and create systems that make leaders replaceable. Josh, thanks so much for coming on. So you've had a really interesting journey where you've worked at the highest level of professional and collegiate sport as a strength and conditioning coach, and now you're working for a startup and trying to bring health and wellness on a greater scale and use that performance model that you applied in the sports setting to the general public. So there's a lot of places that we could begin, but I guess I want to begin by talking about how did you get into pro sports? And if I'm not mistaken, it was at a pretty young age, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, it was. So really, my first break in, I was 22, right out of college. I just graduated University of Wisconsin and was able to land an internship with the Bulls straight out of college. And it was, did that for a season, was gone for a season, spent some time traveling in Australia, worked for Mike Boyle for about 8-9 months. And then the assistant position opened up, and based on I think the way that I had conducted myself in my internship, I set it up in a way where it kind of was a no-brainer on their side. When the role opened up, they just asked me to come back, which obviously for me, I was 24 at the time, so it was a very easy decision to come back in the assistant role full time. But really for me, it started, I think, many of us, that sort of childhood dream. And for me, it was, growing up about an hour and a half north of Chicago in the heart of the Jordan years. You couldn't tell me any different. My dream, I was going to play for the Bulls one day. And I was also that kid that was way too probably stubborn and also ignorant, that I clung on to that dream despite the fact that I was not a very good basketball player. And all the tea leaves, told you, or anyone around me at least, that no way in heck is that happening. And I think fortunately for me, without necessarily fully giving up that dream, I realized it was I need to have a backup plan, and so if for some reason I don't make it as a player, what's another way in? And so I think, for me, I kind of fell in love with the process of, training and everything that I could do to put myself in position to become a better basketball player, the physical development piece. And I knew absolutely nothing about what I was doing, but from the time I was in, grade school, middle school, I was sneaking into the weight room at the YMCA and just, trying to lift weights or do whatever. And so I think it was, maybe late high school, I realized that strength and conditioning, sports performance was a real career. So for me, that it just became this obvious path that I wanted to go down. And so even back then, I started studying, who are the people in positions that I hope to one day get to, that I aspire to, that I look up to, and what have they done? Because, obviously success leaves clues. So I looked for, what were the commonalities, what were the outliers, and that, led me down the path to start seeking out different people, different resources. And, it's just kind of one of those where, one relationship, if you treat it right, leads to the next. One opportunity, opens up two more doors, and so on. And, was able to put myself in a position where by my last year of undergrad, I was working with all the teams at University of Wisconsin, and really in a pretty unique role, because at the time they didn't have any type of formal internship program. It just came out of me for about 2.5 years, just bugging the director for basketball. Every probably 2 or 3 months, I would kind of hit him up and try to get my way in every single time. Basically, he said no, but he'd let me come in and observe a session. And then I'd go observe that session. End of the session, I'd go through my pitch again. I'll clean the weight room. I'll make your coffee. I'll do whatever. And every time it was kind of no, 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 until I wore them down enough where I got that yes going into my last year of undergrad. But the great thing about that was there wasn't like a structure for what my responsibilities were or even what they were not. And so how Scott and Mike Potenza was another mentor, and Brian Miller were the three coaches I really worked with. How they approached me was they gave me as much responsibility as I showed that I was capable of. So by being, really proactive, by not making the same mistake twice, by, starting to be able to anticipate how they did things, what they were looking for, it led to, even as an undergrad, I had, probably 6 or 7 teams that I more or less ran. Like I was the only coach in the weight room. I would make any adjustments, to their workouts, and something that would not be allowed. Like people would get fired nowadays, but through that experience, not only everything I learned working with them and kind of that hands-on learning, but also those relationships. Those three guys knew my boss, Eric Allen, with the Bulls very well. And so that's how I was able to get there and get in, so early to where my like quote unquote interview with Eric, which ended up being the same as my interview with Mike Boyle after I finished that internship. I showed up, I'm nervous, shirt and tie, and this is my big break. And Eric, in the same way as Mike did, just kind of laughed at me. They're like, Josh, this isn't an interview. Like the people that vouch for you, like I put so much stock in, they speak so highly of you. Like I just want to meet you. I want to like get to know you, and and so that was kind of the start to my journey.
Yeah, that's cool. And like a lot of people in this field that I respect, I think I originally was turned on to you because you would talk and write a lot about like the X's and O's of coaching and programming, and you were known as a basketball guy. And now I think there's a lot more that makes you interesting than that. And it's, cultivating relationships and talking about bigger picture type of organizational themes. And so for you in pro sports, like what were some of the things that surprised you, either like as an intern or when you had a full-time position, in terms of like the sort of the perception versus the reality of it, either from like a pure technical side or from like a relationship and a managing people side?
Yeah. I mean, I think it even goes back to when I was in college, when I was at Wisconsin. In all that time that I was kind of trying to get in and work with some of the teams. Where they did have a formal internship was with the football program, and I'd kind of beat down those doors, and that one was just for whatever reason, that one was just kind of closed off to me. And I think at that early stage, I also I just viewed it as like this is a high major Division I football program, goes to the Rose Bowl every year. Like this is kind of the cream of the crop, and this would be my break. And just kind of how closed off they were. It was a little, I guess it was a little surprising for as persistent as I was being, and a little off-putting, and just having some perspective later to actually realize like it was the best thing for me, and it was the best thing for my career and my development that I didn't end up there. And this is something I steal from one of my best friends and closest colleagues, who was my assistant my first year at Purdue. Nicodemus Christopher, he talks about rejection being a sign of direction. And so, I think that was something where it opened my eyes to, you know, understanding that it's not always the destination as well, you're going to have the best mentorship, the best programs, the best coaches, and understanding, the best programs and coaches can exist anywhere, and all the various people that you can learn from. So I think that opened my eyes a lot, and then coming on board with the Bulls, I think it was just realizing, well, there were a couple things. One, yes, the X's and O's are critically important, but without relationships as the foundation of it all, none of it mattered. Because especially in that world, you talk about, and I think this is something that came from my time with the Bulls in particular, is, and it might be semantics, but I think to me it's a big thing. Is a lot of times people talk about building buy-in, and to me that's although it might not be the intention, I think it's misguided. I think really it's building trust, because I think oftentimes when you talk about building buy-in, you're, in my opinion, is you're trying to essentially convince this other person, this athlete, whoever, to do the thing that you believe that they need to do. And as well intentioned as you might be, you don't necessarily have all the answers, and I think you're going to fall short of what they need to do without involving them in that process and forming a partnership and educating them and empowering them. And that was something that really stood out with my time with the Bulls. I was fortunate that first year as an intern, Al Vermeil was still around. And so Al really, very heavily took me under his wing. And then obviously Eric Allen, and they would talk more don't get me wrong, we would talk in depth about sports science and training and analytics and all this different stuff, but we spent the majority of our time talking about relationships and being able to connect with guys and being able to adapt your approach to each person and who they were, their background, where they're at, and and all those sorts of things. So I think that really stood out to me. I think the other piece of it was, I'd kind of had a pretty quick rise relatively in terms of some of the different experiences that I had and mentors I was able to learn from. Because even before Wisconsin, I spent some time down at IMG academies, and had some great coaches I learned from there. And so coming to the Bulls, I was, probably not your typical intern in terms of all that I've done, all that I've been exposed to. And I remember kind of coming in there, and especially with Eric, I give him all these hypotheticals and ask him all these questions on training. And, I'm kind of expecting him to give me a clear cut answer. And every single time, the thing that always stuck out to me was every single time his answer was the same. It depends. I'm and I got to a point I would ask him questions where I'm like, alrighty, now you can't say it depends. And then here's my question, blah, 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 blah. And he'd look at me and start laughing and he'd go, well, that depends, and then he'd talk me through kind of the nuance and all the different things that you had to consider. And, I think up to that point, and I've seen it throughout my coaching career, I think, it's just human nature. It's very uncomfortable to live in that gray, live in that ambiguity. And we kind of want the certainty of black and white, if this, then do that, so I remember even maybe FMS at the time. And it was well, if they score this type of profile, then you do this and this. And even that type of stuff, I would talk to Ian Allen, they'd be well, it depends. And it depends on, it's so multifactorial. It depends on, the stress they're under. It depends on their emotional state. It depends on, all these factors on and on and on, and starting to get comfortable living in that gray and uncertainty. And I think now, fast forward, the more I've learned and the more I've like researched and studied, um, Annie Duke stands out in particular. Like a lot of her work, and like one of her books is Thinking in Bets, and a lot of other people like talk about the concept. But I think for me, she's been one that like I think brings it together the best. And you start to realize like in training there is no black and white correct answer. As much as you want to like seek it out or think that it exists, instead what you're doing is you're thinking in bets. Like you're making decisions with the available information that you have, with the kind of knowledge of what's happened in the past when you've done different things, and you are you're kind of making a bet based on the probabilities that you have that you're making kind of the most informed decision in this moment. And I think that was something that stood out for me. And even I remember Eric talking about it, because him and Al would have they'd have these people like Mel Siff, Carmelo Bosco, Charlie Francis, like would come to the facility, back in the day for weeks at a time, and they'd sit there, and talk shop with them and this and that. And I remember Eric was talking about, I forget who the coach was. It was like one of the all-time greats, Olympic weightlifting coaches from kind of Eastern Europe, like Soviet bloc. And Eric had gone through like years of training data of some of their lifters, like every single workout they'd done over a period of years, and he was already like kind of asked his coach all about it, and he was like, I've been through it all. I've been through it, up and down, left and right, and I just can't make sense of it. Like it doesn't fit any like periodization scheme or anything like that. And the coach just kind of laughed at him, and he was like, well, that's because that's what we actually did. It wasn't the plan. Like, we had a plan, but then this is what we actually did. And it was based on all of the things that you see, in the moment. And that was the thing that I thought like really stood out to me with Eric and Al in particular, but even like the other, the basketball coaches and some of our players, like some of our older players with the Bulls that mentored me, was like their ability to just see how somebody walked into like at our training facility, the parking lot, like the door came into the back of our weight room, and they would just watch like how did people walk into the building that day and make make adjustments or decisions based on that. Like we might have had a big training day planned for somebody, and you see this person just walk in. Normally, like they're boisterous, they're loud, they're full of energy, and now today they're like walking in real slow, like head down, and and kind of making adjustments off of that. And so, I think that was a lot of it. Was the two was the importance of the relationships, and then just the ability to be comfortable living in that ambiguity and living in that gray, and just knowing that you're making the best possible decision given the information that you have at hand, but then later being able to have the humility to come back and say, hey, I made this decision based on X, Y, and Z, and you know what? I made the wrong decision. I screwed up, and put that into your process for that next decision moving forward.
Yeah, and I really like the distinction you made between buy-in and trust. I never thought of it the way that you articulated it. And as soon as you were saying it, I'm like, yep, it seems so obvious now that he's saying it this way. But like, to get buy-in suggests that you have to sell something to somebody, which is a little bit less authentic than just do the right thing and like people will trust you, And like you said, maybe it's semantics, but I think that it is an important difference. It's kind of like the whole like networking thing. Like I'm going to go out and network, but anybody that like I've ever had, sort of like network with, in the sense that, I like got a benefit out of that relationship. It wasn't because I sought to network. It was because it was a real authentic relationship and we did things for each other. And I didn't have to like seek. I wasn't like, hey, I'm networking, here's how I can help you and how you can help me. Right. So I think a lot of these relationships, the more authentic you are, you develop them organically, and the trust is just a byproduct of it versus
Mm-hmm.
having to like sell yourself to get buy-in. So
Mm-hmm.
that was really
Yeah.
cool. And what's funny is you worked in pro sports, where I think in pro sports you have a little bit less control over the environment, and then you went from the Bulls to Purdue. I don't know if you did anything in between or if you went right from the NBA to Purdue, but one thing is like I feel like a lot of people in your position would go from that environment where you don't really have a lot of control to now you're working with younger athletes, collegiate athletes, where you can assume a lot more control. And you actually kind of did the opposite, where you were like you're all about like the decentralized command. You were giving the players and your staff a ton of autonomy. And one of the things I respect about you has always been like you don't make it about you. And a lot of people talk about leadership, and it can become this sort of self-flagellating thing where it's like people just ring the bell about leadership, but in an ideal world, like a leader makes him or herself obsolete, which can be anxiety producing, right? But if you really do your job, like you should create a system that makes you replaceable, and that's what you did at Purdue. So can you speak to just how that developed? Like, did you go into Purdue thinking, well, in 2 years the seniors are going to be running the sessions? Like, how did that actually work, in terms of like, was it something that you just spontaneously came up with? Was it your plan all along? And how did you actually implement it in practice in terms of the execution of like giving your players a lot more autonomy, developing your staff so that you could be more hands off, which is again like the opposite of what most people would do going from pro sports to collegiate sports.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's funny because sometimes with revisionist history, like thinking back, I forget at times about the early periods and even like, there were points at which, we were building and developing, and then we had setbacks that we endured, and sometimes like I almost forget about those things and what it took to really set that foundation to land where we ended up, at the end, where, as you said, and really that was my goal all along, was, and it probably sounds crazy, but coach myself out of a job. And I think it's similar, and I don't have any kids, but in a way there's an element that's kind of like similar to parenting, is like, if you do your job, they should be able to leave the house and be independent, and they don't need you, but they make better decisions. They're better suited, more well prepared because of everything that you did, to lay that foundation, to allow them to make mistakes, learn from them, to teach them what's good judgment, what's bad judgment, all those sorts of things. So you're giving, you're very hands on along the way to set that up. But I think where it really stemmed from, I think part of it is a little bit just my personality, but the other part of it, I think I was very fortunate where my first true experience was in the NBA, and not just in the NBA, but being with Al and Eric, where there is a small locus of control in the NBA, in that if we're in season, if you don't do what I ask you to do, which essentially is just do 2 workouts a week, 8 workouts per month at that time in the NBA, then we can fine you. So there's that consequence. And that was something where, Eric would never fine a guy ever, and if it ever got to that point, the conversation that we had was, if we have to find this guy to get him to do, the things that we're asking him to do, then we're just not that good at our jobs, and we need to be better at our jobs. And, there was one player in particular, who was a younger player, really high draft pick, that we had, I think, maybe 3 out of my 4 years collectively in Chicago. And he was one where, like, I think he went through some tough times, as young guys do, of like being a high draft pick, not really like getting a lot of minutes and this sort of thing. And got to a point where he started to like detach and disconnect from really anybody and everybody in our organization. It was like, everyone in our organization was out to get him, almost. And but I think you can kind of understand why he was like feeling this way, going through some of these things. And so we weren't alone in that. Like, he didn't really mess with us, and I'll never forget, Eric and I had the conversation, and what we talked about was like, again, I was talking earlier, our players come in through the back door of the weight room. They have to walk by Eric's office, and then they have to walk by my office to get to the locker room. This was a player who, he didn't even say hello when he walked by our offices. And so the conversation we had was like, if he doesn't even stop and say hello, then like, we don't have the right to coach him and train him. And so our goal is like, forget anything about training. If he does train, if he doesn't train, like, we have a long ways to go to get there. Our goal is when he walks in the building, he doesn't even have to have a conversation. He just says hello. Because then from that hello, then it's going to lead to maybe he'll like stop and sit down in Eric's office as we're like sitting there drinking coffee, and we'll have a conversation. And that was one where like that one really stood out to me, because you did see that evolution, and that's all we focused on was like, let's get to know him, let's find some connection points. If he did come in the weight room, I never told him what to do. I never even talked about his training. I just come out there, try to like, kind of shoot the shit with him. And then little by little, you could say, then he'd ask me for something. Hey, like, you got something I can do for, core? Yeah, I got you. Here's a little something. And you saw that switch flip where it kind of shifted to where now he was actually seeking out the entire thing from us of like setting the path, for him. And so that was something that really like imprinted on me from my time in Chicago. And so when I then left Chicago to go to Purdue, the other thing I was still pretty young. I was 27, and I think like Robbie Hummel, who was a fifth-year senior at the time. First of all, Robbie looked older than me, but I mean, I think he was like maybe 23 at the time, fifth-year senior. So I'm about the same age as several of our players. And, I think I also realized, like, if I try to come in here and be this like dictator, if I try to fall back on this crutch of like, oh, well, in college, like, you sort of have to do what I say because I said so. Cool, like they can check that box, but like we're not really gonna get them anywhere by doing that. Like, if they don't truly like believe in it and they're not invested in it. And so, I think I approached it from the jump of like, without that foundation of having relationships with each and every single one of these guys, and also realizing like, even I was coming from, with the Bulls, we had just come off of, we had the best record in the NBA. Derrick Rose won MVP, and I think there was an element of me coming in and going, okay, like now I'm going to Purdue. These kids are gonna like kind of eat up everything I say because I just coached Derrick Rose, and like you figure out really quickly, like even if they think that's cool, like they really don't care that much, because now it's like, well, what can you do for me? How can you help me? And I think it was just, early on, what part one was like, we really had to like take a lot of steps back and start from the very beginning. And, I had several juniors and seniors in that had been lifting weights for 3, 4, 5 years. But my first couple of days, as I wanted to see how they moved. Like there were a couple other coaches kind of running their program in interim until I got there, until I finished the season with Purdue. And so when I first got there, instead of like taking over the programming day one, I said, well, look, like you guys have been running through a cycle. Let's stay on it. I just want to sit back and observe. And so, I think that was the first thing, is I started from that place of like, don't let me try to make any like judgments or assumptions or, whatever to start out. Like, here's what I'm going to do. And sort of, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I got to see, like, where are we at? What are the problems? What are the strengths? What are the, and the thing that I realized, I was like, from a training perspective, we had several kids that were quite strong, but didn't necessarily move well. And then we had probably 2/3 of our team that wanted nothing to do with being in the weight room. And in fact, up to that point, they'd never really been expected to like stay on campus in the summer, which is kind of unheard of. So that's where we were starting from. So the first thing I did was actually bring it back to a very generalist program. And everyone was on the same program because I realized everyone needed that same foundational like movement competency. It's like we didn't touch a bar, we didn't touch a platform, none of that for the first 6 weeks. Even these kids who squatted, deadlift, clean for 4 or 5 years, we went back to the basics: isometric holds, combination patterns, body weight, and just attack that because for those kids, I knew there was a lot to gain from just getting those foundational qualities to then truly unlock their strength. And for the other 2/3, it was like we just got to build some confidence of even being in here. And then it was about the sort of mentality and kind of swag that we had when we were in the weight room. At the time, there was just one weight room at Purdue, so we lifted at the same time as the football program. And although I knew we weren't going to lift as much weight as the football program, I wanted our mentality of like we set the tone for how athletes work at this university. So like we're vocal, we're loud, we're also like talking shit to the football players. The football players moving way more weight than we were, but we're like talking bad to them, but like in a playful way to like also get more out of them. And so I think like we had to start there. We're like, now guys genuinely enjoyed actually being in the weight room. They were seeing the benefits of it because I didn't try to like put a bar on their back. I didn't try to like do something that they were uncomfortable with. And then also the other part of it was, we would finish training and myself and Nicodemus, who was my assistant, we would spend the next 3 to 4 hours over at the gym just watching them play pickup. We'd sit there and like grab food with them, and we'd be at the gym until like 10 p.m. just building those relationships, getting to know guys, and then especially as we kind of laid that foundation from the training perspective, we were even during that time, and especially during that time, because it was so foundational. Like you're doing isometric holds, an isometric hold is not that complicated to understand what is the positioning you need and then to also coach others. So right, even from that point, the expectation, like I would jump guys if they had teammates around them that didn't have like perfect technique on it and they weren't speaking. So we set that expectation of like, you don't wait for me, you don't wait for Nicodemus, or if we have interns, you don't wait for us to coach, you coach, and even then a lot of it was like they were setting the tone for the way that we worked and the standard and the energy and the discipline and the accountability. Even from that point, we had it where it was like, and we had to like kind of get there. We didn't necessarily do it like right away, but very early on, we had it where it was like, if you weren't 15 minutes early, you were late, and it wasn't me. Like there was no consequence for me, but it was as a team we talked about what are the standards that we need to live by to achieve our goals, and that was one of them. And so like I had to answer to my teammates, and it was like whatever my teammates deemed, like if they wanted to let it slide, then they let it slide. But whatever the consequence was they kind of own that. So I think we were doing some of that early on. And then when we got in season, is where we were starting to be able to be much more individual, much more almost kind of surgical, and now having those conversations with each individual player of like, hey, how are you feeling? And then based on how they're feeling, we're showing them different strategies of how we can adjust their training, and just getting them like educated on what training is, how they can use it to put themselves in a better spot depending on where they were, what they had coming up. And I think by involving them, it allowed us to like start to give them ownership over, some of the decisions and things like that. And it became much more of a conversation. And I think what ended up happening was I actually went a little bit full circle because we had a great first year. We had some success. We lost some key senior leadership, and the next year we were very young. We didn't make the tournament. The year after that, we ended up finishing in last place. And by that third year, I think I was feeling a lot of the pressure of I was kind of an outcast in the college world because I wasn't an authoritarian. I wasn't a dictator. I gave leeway. I like would lose some battles, so to speak, to try and kind of play the long game. And in a vacuum, coaches, administrators, people that see that, they look at you as though like you don't have control. Like, oh, this person just disrespected you, or that you're not getting the most out of this person. And some things were kind of absolutes for me of like I'm not gonna coach motivation with you. Like I'm not gonna sit here and like scream in your ear and whatever. But I am gonna have like hours of discussion with you to like understand what's important to you, and how can we find a way to work together in which our goals are aligned, and so maybe it's not basketball the thing that is the thing that you're working for, but basketball is a vehicle that can get you the thing that you want. And so now because we connect that, now you are self-motivated and so on. But I kind of went through this process where I started to question myself and like, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I do need to be, more of a dictator. Like we just finished in last place, all this stuff. And it was during that year when I started to get that way. And I realized I was like, I wasn't having any fun. I didn't enjoy kind of the coach that I was. And I don't think I had great relationships with my players that year. And when I stepped back from it, I realized I was like, I would hate to be coached by me right now. And so, I think it was the tail end of that year where I sort of just said like, I'm going to coach the way that I know, the way that I believe is best for our players. And if others, whether it's my head coach, whether it's my AD, whoever it is, if they don't think that's the way to do it, then I'm going to live with it. Like they can fire me. Like I'll be okay. But I have the confidence that this is what's going to get the most out of them. And so I went back to that. But we had coming out of last place, then we had another young group coming in, 4 freshmen that were all like top 100 type kids. And it was like a little bit of that dictator mentality at that time, just because our problems at that point were not necessarily X's and O's. Our problems were like, if we were on the road and we pulled up to an arena or a hotel, guys leaving their Gatorade bottle in the seat. Like the thing I told our coach at the end of that year, I was like, I wish our problems were, X's and O's in this and physical development. But until we get to a point where our guys like, when we pull up somewhere, they grab their Gatorade bottle, walk to the front, throw it in the trash, thank the bus driver, go, walk, grab the door, hold it open for the next person, say please, say thank you. It was like there was this entitlement, and at Purdue, we had just got brand new facilities, all these things that actually people before us, had really were the ones that earned. Like we didn't earn this. And so we went through that off season where it was like, we went back and I said, okay, one, having a program that is individual to each of us, that's a privilege. You have to earn that. So we're going back to everyone's doing the same program. You have to earn the right to wear like Boilermakers across your chest. So I had our equipment manager get just like non-logo, just like black and gold, like Nike, workout stuff. No Purdue, nothing on it. The other thing was we walked around campus like we were, like king, whatever, like, and but we didn't. I mean, really, that's not something we should have done to begin with, but we didn't. We certainly didn't have the right to. So the other piece was like when we were training, if no other teams were in there, there was no music. If there were other teams in there, then it was whatever music they wanted to play. So we'd have like some of the
Oh
women's
wow.
team playing like some crazy European techno, and like our guys like would have rather no music, but it was like nope, that's it's there because we had to like we had to like earn it, and we had to we've been entitled, and even it was like cleaning up the weight room. It was like it didn't matter. It wasn't just the stuff we used. If other people had left a mess, we had to clean that up. We had to clean the entire weight room, put everything back precisely where like the logos are facing top up. I had a little Gatorade fridge in my office. I had to restock every bottle so the logo like perfectly matched up. And clean the locker. It was all these things where we had to go through that. We had to kind of earn that. And so this was a freshman class that ended up they were seniors the year that I left. So that's their first experience. Is we had to go through that. We had to earn that. That was really hard, really uncomfortable. Kind of got back on track that year, and even that year with a lot of those freshmen, I was already talking to them about leaving their mark on this team and being leaders and starting to be leaders. Even at that stage, and I demanded of everyone on our team, all 15 was everyone can and should be a leader, and it's tapping into a lot of the situational leadership as well as like sometimes for whatever reason a freshman might be the one that's able to get through to a junior just because of the relationship that they have. So recognizing that and like empowering them to be able to have those conversations, step up when need be. um, their sophomore years, I was able to like relinquish it a little bit more. We had a little more success that year, but then at the end of that year, we were a 5 seed. We were pretty good. Played a 12 seed, Little Rock. We were up 14 with 3 minutes left. They end up coming back, tying the game, winning in double overtime. And I learned a lot and I realized a lot in watching that and reflecting afterwards is I realized like how much collectively as a whole we'd sort of given our players safety nets, like and you think about how a lot of sport practices are conducted. It's like anytime a player makes a mistake, whistle is blown, things are stopped, they get cussed out, they whatever. And if you really think about it, there's a safety net where they never truly need to like learn the thing themselves, figure it out themselves, because while it might be uncomfortable to get cussed out, they realize if I screw up, the only thing that happens is I get cussed out and told what I do wrong, and then like, I figure it out that way. And you realize in those moments where, it was okay, so I make one mistake, but being able to like come back into the moment and not think about the mistake I just made and not get into the future of like, oh man, what if I turn it over again and now the crowd's getting louder, and all these things where our players all of a sudden kind of became a shell of themselves, and you saw so much of it was just an inability to bring themselves back in the moment, and just they're kind of looking for someone else to solve things for them. And so, I reflected and I looked at it and I realized I was like, until we put these guys in that position to truly like fail, make mistakes, figure it out themselves and take ownership of this, it doesn't matter how good we are, how talented we are. If we get back in this situation next year, the same darn thing's gonna happen. Like if one thread starts to unravel, like we lose our minds. And so going into that off season, Legacy was a book I was already a huge, kind of fan of, one of my favorite books. I had, I think, like five of our core kind of older veteran guys. I had them all read that book, but I had multiple, like I'd taken them out to dinner and lunch and had conversations about it and framed the whole like idea of like, hey, we're going to be player led. And honestly, I told them, like, I prepared them how hard it was going to be. I told them, our head coach and others are probably going to think like I'm out of my mind. Like low key, they might want to fire me because there's going to be days where, our sessions are probably going to get out of hand. I'm going to look like an idiot, but you guys got to figure it out. And part of it was even establishing like what are our mantras? What is the language that we use? All these, I think a lot of times in the team setting, as coaches, we spend all this time, we talk to people, we read, we whatever, and we go, all right, guys, here are our values. Here's what we're going to be defined by, and here's our like mantra for this year. Like rah rah, let's go. And it's like cool. It all sounds good, but it means absolutely nothing to them. And it's their team ultimately.
Yeah.
And so that was step one. Was out of that concept of legacy and being player led was what is the language that we're using? And so that it has personal meaning. And so they led those conversations with the rest of our team to where, players discussed what they wanted for our team. What were the standards? What were our goals? What was the language? I helped guide some of those discussions, but I never made the decisions for them. And then they came up with, because some of the stuff with like, if we have a mantra, it needs to mean something. It needs to tie back to, kind of a moment in time, a feeling. It needs to like, it needs to like have significance when I say it. It needs to like, either help me to like push through this thing, help me to like come back to the moment or whatever it is. So I think that was a big piece. And then, and then the other piece was just like allowing them to now, and what we talked about was like, you guys own the day-to-day execution and standards. Like if you guys decide it doesn't matter if guys show up for workouts, it doesn't matter if they show up late, like then that's fine. That's our culture. And that's what it'll be. Now we had a good group, so like that wasn't going to happen. But they set that standard of 15 minutes early of like how we train, and what we talked about was myself and my assistant and others. We own the high level decisions of helping guide you, strategically of what we should do. But you guys own, setting the tone and the standard and the discipline and accountability. And you would have days where it was a bad session, and then resisting the urge to jump in and just let it be a bad session, but then after the fact grabbing some guys and saying, not even telling them, but saying, hey, what'd you think about today's session? Because one, like, did they even have an awareness of how that session went, or were they too focused on what they were doing themselves to where what was the problem here? And then from there, giving some guidance, like, well, here's from my perspective what I saw, and here's some strategy for maybe how you might want to think about approaching this, or if something needs to happen between now and our next session, and just helping them, but ultimately saying, hey, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving you some guidance. You make the call, and letting them make that call, but, just removing, kind of removing myself from it, giving more and more to them. And it's a really hard process because I think you go through a lot more bumps before you get to the point that, it truly is something kind of special, and it kind of runs itself. And, what I realized for us was a lot of the learning of them kind of running things was going to have to happen in our environment, because I knew it wasn't going to happen in the practice environment, but I knew in those like 4 or 5 months, if we established that where it was just second nature for them, and then they went and they did it on day one of practice and they showed it, that our coaches would start to defer. And I mean, that's kind of what ended up happening. But yeah, I mean, to your point, it got to that stage where even from a training perspective, in season, the conversation became, not just how are you feeling, what do you feel like doing today, but it was actually how are you feeling, what are you going to do today? Because they were so well prepared and educated to make those decisions. And then I would have a conversation with them, and I would guide them in that decision to say, hey, well, still consider, here's what we have coming up on our schedule. So you might want to think about still working in X, Y, and Z today in addition. And they go, okay, yeah, no, that sounds good. Um, and I think even from a training perspective, they own that environment so much, and the choices they're making. So the belief they had in what they were doing and the intent that they had behind it, I think is one of the biggest factors of, ultimately the success that we were able to have. Sorry, that was super long-winded.
No, but that's
It took me
that's
back like 7 years, so I'm trying to, because I think a lot of times I talk about the most recent, and then I
yeah.
leave out that there was a lot of like, almost like what you would think of as like a dictator approach. Like it
Yeah.
was there at times,
Right. And
So
I mean, like, yeah, and I'm glad that you actually qualified that, 'cause I don't want to make it seem like you just wave magic dust and all of a sudden the players had all this responsibility and autonomy, and you put your own career at risk doing that. So it's not like you didn't know that it was going to work out. I mean, you were taking a risk and a leap of faith. So, you have some really cool experiences up to this point. You're working for the Bulls. They make a deep run in the playoffs. You're coaching the MVP of the league. Then you go to
mhm.
Purdue, where I think you guys got to like the top five, make a deep tournament run. So like in our field, I mean, you've been to the pinnacle, and then you coach yourself out of a job, so to speak, because you helped to cultivate a culture where your staff and the athletes were taking a lot of responsibility. So you were just kind of guiding, right, and just making sure that nobody went astray. And then you get approached by a software company to work for a startup, which is just something that probably maybe like surprised you, but obviously you ended up working for them. So what was the impetus for that? So what, like, tell people first who don't know, like, what is Future, and then how did they end up approaching you to make this career 180 where you go from coaching elite athletes like at the pinnacle of human performance to now you're trying to bring this performance model to the general population and just create really good wellness programs at scale that are technology enabled but still have a human connection.
Yeah. So Future, what it is, and I'll kind of speak to what it is today because we have, some larger visions for what it can and will become. But right now, today, Future is a digital personal training app. So we pair you one to one with a real person who is, high level performance coach, personal trainer. Most of our coaches, I think, is like 82% or something like that of our coaches have trained professional college Olympic athletes. So really, really high caliber coaches. But this is someone who then is essentially in your life with you every single day, but all through your phone. So you're never actually meeting in person, but your coach is, texting back and forth with you just about every day. In fact, on average, our clients trade nearly 5 messages with their coach every single day on average. But then your coach is building you out a custom training plan, all specific to you, the same way that obviously we would in person, of like first, having a conversation, in our case, FaceTime, to get to know you, what are your goals? What are your motivations? What do you like? What do you not like? All those sorts of things, building out the plan and kind of progressing you from there. Then the workouts themselves are fully guided with video as well as, custom audio, all that sort of stuff. For you to do the workouts, your coach is checking in with you before you work out, after you work out. We give you an Apple Watch, so we're also able to track, everything that you're doing in these workouts to kind of make adjustments and all that. And so that's kind of what Future is. And yeah, I mean, it was, for me leaving Purdue, it was a very, going from something that really, I built up to a point where I think I knew like I was pretty good at what I was doing. I had a lot of confidence in what we built. We'd had a ton of success, but I think it was a world where like if I was doing well, I knew I was doing well, and if I was doing a terrible job, I knew I was doing a terrible job. And this is a world where I was like, I have no idea. I didn't necessarily have a bar, and it's also a world where even coming in, I sort of knew like there's not only there's a lot that I don't know, but there's all kinds of stuff that I don't even know I don't know. And now like I'm gonna just have to figure it out. I'm gonna be, sort of in charge of that thing. And for me, what kind of led to ultimately making the jump was, I got recruited for the role. So it was something that like I never really would have probably imagined otherwise. But I was at an interesting point in my career where I was, I had fully coached myself out of a job at Purdue, like probably those last 2.5, 3 years. And I say this all the time is I think whether I was there or I wasn't there, our program wouldn't have skipped a beat. I mean, that's how dialed in our players were and our culture was, and how effective they were at being able to make decisions. And so for me, I was a little stagnant, because it sort of ran itself, and I was looking for another challenge. But the big thing was I wanted a bigger platform to be able to help more people, and in particular, like the thing that motivated me was having assistants, interns, all that along the way, and being able to pour into them and help them develop in their careers and help them reach heights that maybe they didn't even think were possible. And so it's like, how can I do that on a larger scale, even beyond and outside of strength and conditioning or basketball? And I also started to think like 20 years down the line instead of just 5. Like, what could I do in 20 years? And it led me down this path of like, well, in 20 years, why couldn't I be the general manager or team president of an NBA team? And then it kind of like in my childhood, like working my way back, who are the people in those positions and what was their path to get there? And when I looked at that, I saw several people who the commonality I saw, especially for someone like me, coming from being a strength coach to like all of a sudden, okay, I'm going to go and be a GM. One thing I knew was like, okay, I got to kind of rebrand myself. And the commonality that I saw was a lot of these people, GMs, had their JD, had their law degree, and so it was something where my last year at Purdue, I kind of made up my mind of like, okay, I think that's what I need to do. So I had about 2 months time to study for the LSAT. Like, I'm gonna figure it out one way or another. Took the LSAT, applied to law schools, and that was kind of my path. I was going to go to law school, and whatever city I went to, I was going to work in the front office for the NBA team in that city, and like either an intern role or low level like operations role just to get in. And so it was just kind of like fortuitous the timing that I started getting recruited for Future right as I was like already kind of prepared to make that jump, which was, going to be presumably pretty crazy, especially from what I was doing. And again, just like going back to relationships, like a lot of close relationships I'd formed, especially during my time in Chicago, some of my closest friends are people who now have all been very successful in like the tech and startup world. So they're able to kind of talk me through like what the opportunity was and what it could be, and and kind of push me and urge me to make the jump. And what's interesting is every single one of them kind of said to me was, one, you have to do this, but two, 100% this will fail in 1 year. Like not, it might, it could, maybe it will. Either, because we were a seed stage company, which basically 99% of companies at the stage we were do not make it. 1% make it. So just the statistics tell you you're not going to make it. And the second part of it was they were like, even if you're part of that 1% that makes it, then you hate it. You miss what you were doing. You miss coaching. You absolutely hate it. And they're like, with that in mind, that that is a certainty. You have to do this because in 1 year, you'll grow 5 years professionally. And so, everything that you can learn, everything you'll get exposed to, um, and the relationships that you can build was like, even if I go back into the sports world, I'm going to be that much stronger as a professional. I'm going to have that much more behind me. Where especially if I do want to go the GM route, I'm going to probably pick up a lot of the kind of skills and knowledge to set myself down that path. Or maybe I decide I want to start a company of my own. I'm learning a lot of those things. I'm building several of those key relationships, and then I think what kind of spoke to me was, the problem that we're setting up out to solve, which is, 80% of our population, 4 out of every 5 people, is not active enough or at all. 75% are obese or overweight. And no one has ever solved this problem at scale. And when you look at it, it's really a very solvable problem, but it's figuring out the challenge of how do we pair people at large with high level coaches and experts who can be in their life and kind of guide them and set a path for them. And I realized in solving that problem, I also have the opportunity to build a team and to do what I'd sort of done at Purdue and even with the Bulls of helping to develop really talented coaches and professionals and help them advance in their careers and get better. And so I realized this was going to give me that opportunity as well to kind of like create jobs and pour into these people and help develop them, help them to like see things that they may have never thought were possible for themselves and like help them get there. And so that was for me was just like taking that leap for the opportunity of what it could become and also not wanting to look back. I think when I was going back and forth and I was still kind of leaning towards going to law school, the thing that kept sticking out was like, I don't want to look back and kind of say what if. And in fact, like our founding COO at the time, he said something to me that always just stuck with me and resonated with me when it kind of came down to that final decision. I was still on the fence. He looked at me, he was like, Josh, I would hate for you to read about us one day. And like that just stuck with me of like what this can be. And I have the opportunity to be in the ground floor and like help to like lay the foundation and build this thing. Like I have to give it the chance, and you think through again, like what is the worst case scenario, and you don't just prepare for it, you expect it, and you have to be okay with it. And how I made that leap was like being okay that the worst case scenario is going to happen. And I was probably in a fortunate position of things I've done in my career where my worst case, even though it was like a really bad worst case for me, is like actually not that bad. Like my worst case is I could probably go and get another strength and conditioning job. Like I might not start right back where I was, but like I can probably get in with a high schooler. I can get in with like, a low man. I can get in somewhere and then I can work my way back up. So it was kind of a risk that, I had to take.
Yeah. And your main role with Future is to build a team. And you kind of touched on, you have some personal relationships that you developed over the years, where you had a pool of people to choose from. So can you speak to like, elaborate a little bit more on like how you built that team? And also what I want you to get into is how do you go about like identifying the talent and then ensuring they're a good fit? Because I saw you at a post, maybe it was like a couple of weeks ago, where you're talking a little bit about like what you do during the on-ramping process or the interviewing process. And I feel like in a lot of the technology world and the startup world, like there's almost like a hazing that goes on where they ask people these really abstract questions that are totally unrelated to the job, and they want to make people uncomfortable. It's like, I want to see how this person responds when they're really uncomfortable. So they'll ask them something stupid that's not related to what they're going to do. And this is just me. I kind of look at it like, if I am hiring someone, first of all, it's my job if I'm running the organization to make them comfortable. Like unless you're in a job like the military where, presumably you're going to be uncomfortable at times because of chaotic situations. If you're working for a technology company, like you really shouldn't be that uncomfortable, so to speak.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
what, like, again, if you could speak to like that interviewing process, the on-ramping process, how you're identifying talent, and then how you're ensuring that like you're actually really getting a gauge of what these people are capable of in a very
Mm-hmm.
brief and superficial interview process without kind of playing some of the games.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something where it kind of evolves over time as well as you can imagine. So, starting out where, I mean, when I joined, it was 8 of us total in this little basement office, and we were trying to solve this impossible problem, and we didn't even have a website at the time. I think we maybe had 50 to 70 clients who were all kind of in beta at that point, and so it was we definitely had our hands full of kind of what was ahead for us. And I think for me, the way that I looked at it was in building this team to what it will eventually become, where like our goal is getting to a point where we are helping millions of people, which means we have tens of thousands of coaches. And but even short of that is like getting to 20 coaches, getting to 100 coaches. And so the way that I looked at it was the initial people that we get on board have to be like really freaking strong. Like and they, I think it was people where I looked for, they got to be really strong in terms of like programming expertise, in terms of like EQ and coaching, and like very, kind of well rounded, and sort of some heavy hitters where it was like, if we can set the foundation with some really strong coaches, now what that sets up for is now we can start to bring on, some people at times where we maybe take a chance on this person who maybe they're younger, they're not as established, they're a little greener, but they kind of have the underlying values where you feel good kind of making the bet on their potential, also understanding the environment that you're bringing them into, and all of the strong sort of mentorship that they'll have available to them with the team, the foundational team that you built, and some of the resources and structure. And so where I started was like, first, let me tap into my network. Let me get people, because also like it was important at that point. I gotta try and get some people in here where like I know intimately, how they're going to perform, what their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, and getting some people where it's like they, hopefully like really compliments me in areas that I'm weak, and I can start to lean on them for that, and like get people smarter than me, get people better than me, and really try to pour into them and empower them to, kind of step into that, and to tackle this together, for us to, kind of build this together, because especially with what we're trying to solve, there is no roadmap, there is no blueprint. Like nobody's ever done it before. So even for me, as like the leader of the group, to say, oh, like just follow me, like I don't necessarily know. Nobody's done it. Like I have my best idea. Now I have to make calls at times. Like I have to, knowing that like actually you might be right, I might be wrong, but here like I'm in a position where it's my responsibility to like make the decision. So I'm making the decision here because I believe that I'm going to be right. But getting those people that you could trust, and again, you sort of knew, you had some confidence in who they were, who you're, because also we couldn't afford at that stage. I couldn't afford to hire anybody where it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Like if even one didn't work out at that time, our company does not exist today. And so that's where I started. I think the first 4 coaches that I hired were all, 3 of them were coaches who I'd worked with for like multiple years. And then the very first coach I hired, Renee Zernicke, we knew each other. We hadn't worked together, but she came up under my mentor, Eric Helen. And like, so I knew the stock she
Yeah.
was coming from. I knew what she was about. The other part of it was we had to like really establish a strong culture at the time of like, at that time, it is, and I hate to use this analogy because you've actually been there, so I don't want to like say that it is, but how it's talked about is like it's wartime. In kind of that world, startup world, you talk about like wartime and peacetime. Like that wartime, just using that analogy of like, hey, it's like figure it the heck out one way or another, or you cease to exist as a company. And so like all this whole idea of like, whether it be like work life balance or like, well, my hours are this, or, all of that, like none of that matters at that time. Like you have way too few people to tackle way too many problems. You need people that like are going to eat, sleep, and breathe it, and they see the bigger potential of what it can be. So I think I also leaned on some people that I knew had, some of my same mentality in terms of that, like that work ethic and that approach and that, ability to just like be resourceful, be relentless, and like not give up on a problem. Like keep trying, do whatever it takes to solve it. And so those were kind of the first, four people I hired. So then that set a tone of like the way in which we work, the way in which we collaborate and share ideas, the humility, because it was people who they themselves, have little to no ego, and the humility, but yet like they're unbelievably knowledgeable and have a high degree of expertise. And I think when you have people like that, where they have a really high degree of expertise, but yet they have a ton of humility and they don't like try to necessarily flex it on others, it creates that environment where now people coming in don't feel the need to like act like something maybe they're not, or like they have all the answers. And I think it just creates this really rich environment where now people are not afraid to like ask a really stupid question or share a dumb idea, or any of that, which was also I think something we needed. But to build your team, eventually your direct network obviously runs out. At
Yeah.
that point, I was fortunate of like now I can tap into whether it's like people like you, Mike Boyle, Mike Robertson, like all these people where it's like I have close relationships with them. I know they know a lot of people, and I trust if they vouch for somebody
Right.
that I can feel pretty good about it. Because again, we had to get those hires right. And so that's how we kind of set that foundation with the first 20, where it was like really some pretty heavy hitters, some pretty well-rounded people. And then towards the tail end of that allowed us, I think, to start to bring in some more like quote unquote like specialists. Like towards the tail end of that, we took probably our first kind of like chance on a coach, Karina Nickerson. And Karina was somebody who like she'd only sort of been a strength coach and ever trained people by default because she was a GA swim coach. The head swim coach, for whatever reason, didn't like the strength coach at the university. So he was like, hey, by the way, Karina, you're going to be the strength coach. And so for like 2 years by default, she took that on. She was resourceful, like but she probably went on the level of like, Renee as knowledge of programming. But what she had was she had a master's in sports psychology, and she could go very deep on the EQ side, and she's better than anyone on our team on that side of things. So now it was like that gives us the ability to like take that chance on her because we have such a strong foundation of people that can pour into her and help develop her on the programming side. But then she can bring something that's better than the rest of us and help kind of develop the rest of us. And that was the thing and that was kind of the bet that I made was like by having that foundation really strong, now we can go out and we can really sprinkle in a lot of that diversity. Because also for us to like solve this problem, we need to be able to have expertise across all different realms and also being able to, kind of work together. And then, from there, we're now like obviously we're getting further and further away of like any type of connection with people that we're hiring. Um, the one thing that I looked at first and foremost is like, what are the values that sort of I believe, and then kind of in talking with our team together, like, our team believes as well, will allow us to be successful as a team, will allow us to kind of win as a company. And so for us, we identified kind of five core values. And I won't go too in depth with each of the values, but I'll just kind of talk, what each of them are. The first one is this idea of like client first, but really it's about like setting my ego aside and really, it's like none of this is about me. It's about helping this other person, whether it's working with a client, whether it's working with, my colleagues and teammates, at the company. It's kind of putting my ego aside and, helping this other person. It's about this bigger kind of goal and opportunity. It's be relentless. Again, the problem that we're trying to solve kind of requires, or especially at that stage, this approach of, never giving up on a problem, like being resourceful. Like by definition, we're trying to solve what are currently impossible problems. So not having a defeatist attitude, but instead of like, if this were to be possible, how can we make this possible? Being a giver, being someone who I do whatever I can, whenever I can, because I can to help someone else. And it's not like tit for tat. You owe me one, I'll do this for you, but then you owe me one. But just, you need help, I can help you, so I'm going to help you, and that's it. And when you build a team of people like that, it's amazing, how quickly that comes back around. And then it's kind of like the energy. So we have this idea of like positive vibes, which is like, this is going to be really freaking hard. And for most of us, this may be the hardest job we ever have. It's going to be really frustrating at times. It's going to be all these things. It's not like all sunshine and rainbows. It's not like, oh, put on a smile, but our collective majority has to be positive, at all times. I got to have the people around me that I can lean on, can pick me up. And then when I get through, my struggle or whatever, I got to be one of those people to pick others up and kind of have an awareness of what is the energy I'm bringing in, to a room, to an environment. And then the last one is the spirit of yes and, like taken from improv culture, just like not even growth minded, but open minded, and just be open. Like you don't have to agree, but be open to other ways of doing things. Be open to other people's ideas. And I think that helps create that environment where when we have such diversity of knowledge and expertise and thought, there's not these walls going up and like shutting people down. We're creating the space because everyone's truly open. And when you're open, I think you can get to the the best solutions, the best outcomes, but you can also learn from one another. I might not change how I do things, but I can certainly learn a lot from you, even if we do things completely differently, if I'm open to it. And so from our interview process, that was, I kind of look at it as like the 51%. That 51% is more important to what we're doing, especially with such a strong foundation of talent that we started our team with, is all the like specific knowledge. If they have this 51%, these five values that they kind of embody and embody through, kind of learning through specific examples of what they have done and hearing them talk about whether it's, past experiences, past clients, like you hear that come through of like specific examples, not just surface level, sort of buzzwords. Then the other part, the 49%, the technical expertise, they can learn that. We can teach them that. They can grow there. And the thing, to your point, I think I go back to in recruiting talent and trying to find talent is like when I was with the Bulls, our draft evaluation process, we had probably one of the most thorough, extensive, kind of draft testing that we would do when players would come to our facility. And one of the things, and again, I learned this from Eric and Al, I would sit there and I would coach players up, and as would, Eric as well. We would coach players up to perform at their absolute best on every single test that we did. We're like, I think sometimes you would see people and it's almost like, oh, like this player, like they're starting out, like we're running a 20-meter sprint and they have their feet set wrong. So I'm just gonna let them look like an idiot and run a slow time and like take that time. And you're like, you're trying to select for the best talent and you didn't get his best performance. And so like even just taking that of like, and some of the drills were like drills that they would have done for the first time. Like even one sounds simple, but it's a 4 repeat jump. I would sit there, I would take them through multiple reps of it. They would do it. I would coach them. I would show them again. And we would sit there until they truly felt good. And I felt good that they had given their best, the best representation of, who they are athletically, physically, because that gave us the most well-rounded picture of, do we want to draft this guy? And so I think it's been no different for us in the interview process. Is I don't want to throw any like curveballs or tricks at this person. Like I'm not trying to catch you off guard. I'm trying to make you comfortable. I'm trying to like, I've had people who I've interviewed and I ask them questions and for whatever reason, they're like super, super nervous and they're like freezing up on me. I help them. Like I talk them through it. They're like, oh, sorry. Like I'm blanking. I don't know what to, and I'll give them some things. I'll be like, okay, well, here's an example. Maybe tell me about a time where such and such happened. And then I get them to like get comfortable, find that story, share that story with me. And, I think also the more you kind of get them to open up, you get so much more context because you're getting specific examples. You're hearing what it means to them, what they learned from it. And in that, I think the through line is like, I'm learning where their values sit, where their values lie. And I think where I've kind of made mistakes in hiring at times is not protecting as fiercely as I should have, especially those 5 values. Like when I've looked back at times where maybe it didn't work out. First of all, I always put that on me. It's ultimately it's on me because I didn't set this person up to be successful, the way that I could have. But I think also I've seen oftentimes where it's like, I kind of like got loose with that one value. Like they had 4 of the 5, but like that relentless piece, like I didn't really feel it. And so then it wasn't a great fit for either party. And so I think even as part of the interview process and recruiting, and it's interesting. But a lot of what I'll do is I'll sell people on why they wouldn't want to work with us and all the things that they would hate and all that because I think that's important is like
yes.
Come in eyes wide open, versus like if I make it all, peachy and rainbows and and then you come in and there's a couple of things that suck and there's these warts and that's not a good experience, for anybody. And it's not setting that person up for success. It's not setting you, as a company up for success.
Yeah, and I think that's very illuminating because I feel like to me the burden should be on the interviewer to get the most out of the interviewee. And it's not a contest to see like how clever and abstract and creative the interviewer can be, right? Like, 'cause that makes it very like interviewer centric versus like what's actually the point of this interaction. The point is to like find the right people, not to like stump somebody. And so as you know, going from 100 coaches to 10,000 is a totally different conversation altogether that I hope that we get to have down the road because that would be great for you and great for future. To wrap it up, because I feel like a lot of the audience members are actually or could potentially be a great fit for the future, whether it's the trainers, strength coaches, or even you have some physical therapists that work for the company. It's a pretty unique career where you can work remotely. Where can people learn more about you and future, and how can they best contact you?
Yeah, so check out our website, future.co. And I encourage everyone to also look at our coaches page because I think the greatest strength of our company and why everyone loves working at Future so much is like the people that we get to work with. So future.co/coaches, and you can see who all those people are, where everyone comes from. And like I said, not only that depth of knowledge and experience, but the diversity of it all is I think really, really unique in terms of the environment you're able to come into and all the resources that you have to learn and grow, especially in areas where maybe you're not as strong, but then you also have so many opportunities to contribute in the areas where your strengths lie. And then for me, really social media, either Twitter or Instagram, at @jbonhotal is the best place probably to find me. And then, I've been trying to do more kind of like podcasts and discussions through a platform called Highlighter, but I post about those on Twitter. We've had some great ones. We had you on. So we've had some heavy hitters come on. We do that every other week, and that's part of our internal coaches continuing education. But we've done it in a way to open it up broadly to anyone that wants to join and kind of participate in that conversation.
Well, you've been really generous with your time, and I'm excited to see, where this, how far this goes. But you're off to a great start. So thanks again.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to be on with you. And you're somebody who I'm definitely very grateful for all of our conversations and all of the support that you've given me throughout the years. And you're someone who I think I constantly look at as someone that makes me better. I look and I learn from you, and I look at what you're doing, and I think it challenges me to raise the bar, for myself as well. So I really appreciate you and taking the time with me as well.
Likewise, man. Well, thanks again.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to the Resilient Performance Podcast. For 10% off our continuing education membership platform, please use promo code PODCAST at our website, resilientperformance.com, and be sure to join our mailing list for monthly exclusive content.